Good morning and welcome to the Canadian Orthodox Monastery of All Saints of North America and to Canadian Orthodox Broadcasting. I wanted to, this All Things Considered broadcast, consider a modern problem, and it's a modern problem only because of social networking and so many so-called alternate news sources. We've always had distortions and contortions of the news, usually done for political, some kind of propaganda or ideological reasons, for centuries. But it's become an acute problem in our particular time. And it's also become a problem that is sufficiently destructive and causes divisions in society, causes divisions and polarizations in whole countries. A close friend of mine and I had coffee a couple of days ago, and he was complaining that his girlfriend, who's a bit on the right-wing side, had seen somewhere online that Michelle Obama was actually a man in disguise. And so it was obviously from some right-wing fake news source. And she's absolutely convinced that this is true. After all, she said, they couldn't put it online if it wasn't true, could they? Well, of course they can. In fact, the Oxford English Dictionary has accepted a new phrase as a valid English word, post-truth. And it relates directly to fake news. Now, fake news was quite a subject during the recent American general election for president. Fake news was very much in evidence, and it was being criticized by both sides in the American election, and probably both sides were correct. There was a great deal of fake news on every side. A lot of it, of course, was partisan, propagandistic. Some of it was conspiracy theorists, and others were put out just to create havoc, sometimes thinking it was humorous, and other times just to try to create problems. One of the problems, though, about this fake news, aside from the devastation that it can cause, it's not just about people who are running for political offices. It's also attacks and ad hominem attacks on individuals that one might disagree with. And perhaps most tragic, it's very, very common in theological discussions and among hyper-religious people or right-wing religious people. People who are arguing from a point of ideology think that it's perfectly moral to tell lies, to slander and make distortions about other people in order to defend an ideological position. But that doesn't occur only in religions. It's very prominent in religious circles, but where morality is rather malleable when you're defending what you think is your ideology. It happens on a much larger scale with world news and with national news. And it causes divisions in societies and cultures. It can cause divisions in families. It can polarize people within a nation. And this is always destabilizing overall. One of the shocking realities is that although we have the means to fact check so many of these fake news stories, very few people do. And the result is that for the most part, people have absolutely no idea what's actually going on in the world around them. We have whichever fake news appeals to the particular ideological orientation we have, is the one we accept as absolute. And we never bother to find out whether they're true or not. But this sort of thing actually weakens the fabric of society and causes very deep schisms and divisions that are very bad for any community, any nation, and of course it's bad for religious bodies as well, although that's where the epidemic is the worst. I'd like to read a headline that some people have actually taken literal, even though it's in a tabloid called The Globe, which is infamous, like the National Enquirer, for fake news. And it claims that Prince Charles is being held before a military tribunal on trial for ordering the murder of Princess Diana. As ludicrous, almost insane as this headline is, and of course the story itself says absolutely nothing about what the headline speaks about, but it sells newspapers. It's an almost insane headline, but the problem is there are masses of people who will believe this, repeat it over and over, and even though this trial never takes place, no such charge is ever made, they will still believe that it's true. On an international scale, this can be quite dangerous because it can interfere with the relationship between nations. Because the trouble is that people in legislatures, Parliament or Congress or House of Representatives, also are susceptible to believing the fake news that plays most to their particular ideological orientation, without ever really fact-checking to find out what's actually going on. And at that higher level, the legislative assemblies of various kinds, well, this can create serious international problems and quandaries. There's almost a mythology around now that you cannot trust any of the regular news sources. Perhaps one of the big weaknesses with the regular news sources, national newspapers, Times of London, the Toronto Globe and Mail, which is our international paper here in Canada, and others, is that there's not a great deal of news in them. But we should at least stop and think about news reports and world reports that we see. If we think that we don't trust the corporate media, why on earth are we going to trust these unfounded, almost autonomous, even though names are given, they're still autonomous news sources, about a really spreading fake news? Sometimes maliciously, sometimes because people think it's humorous. And see whether the ideas that we're forming ourselves have any basis in reality and fact. It's incumbent primarily upon politicians who are leaders of a nation to do some fact-checking. But the one thing I perhaps want to address the most is a human weakness that needs to be struggled against. We form hard and fast ideologies about a world where we know that Satan is particularly active in programming how people think and how they act. And then we seek not to find out whether we're correct, whether what we believe is true, whether it conforms to reality, to fact-check even ourselves sometimes. Instead, we seek out only those fake news sources, and mostly fake news sources, that seem to verify our ideology, that seem to verify our preformed point of view, without ever wanting to grow, learn, develop, open our minds, enrich our experience, and enrich our minds and our intellects by exploring and finding out if perhaps our ideology is wrong, and instead of trying to find out what's actually going on in the world, instead of trying to find out what's actually true, what the actual facts are, we're simply so arrogant that we only want to verify our own perspective, our own point of view, our own understanding. And that has to apply to everyone. But I think it has to apply to those of us who are involved in the church, those of us who are religious. Because very often, the facts that, or the ideas that form our vision of reality are 2,000 or more years old, formed in the Stone Age or the late Iron Age. As if nothing has been learned about the universe, about our earth, about humanity, about what makes humanity, and about life itself. In all of 2,000 years, absolutely nothing new has been discovered. Never mind the fact that we have vaccines. People even rail against vaccines because of fake news that they see conforms to an ideology of conspiracyism, which is a disease in our era. We've made enormous discoveries and enormous advances. Practically nobody thinks the earth is flat anymore. Practically nobody, outside of Islam anyway, thinks that the sun moves around the earth any longer. Practically nobody believes that fresh water and salt water absolutely won't mix any longer. And there's so many aspects of the physical human person and of the brain and of medicine and of all manner of scientific realities that have been discovered and proved over and over and over again in our societies, throughout the whole world, in every scientific community around the world, in every medical community around the world. But we still have people who think that psychiatric illnesses such as bipolar or schizophrenia are demonic possessions. Some people even think that epilepsy is a demonic possession in our day. Oh, religious people, of course. And we've actually seen a few people killed by exorcisms, literally. Because people refuse to realize that our knowledge, our understanding, our information has changed over the last few thousand years. So people lock into various ideologies in politics, in philosophy, in religion, and in some kinds of pseudoscience. And then go around searching for some news source that's going to verify or try to substantiate their preconceptions, their prejudices, the ideologies that they've frozen their minds into. That's one of the problems with fake news, because somebody out there is providing fake news about practically everything. Most people in North America, Canada and the United States as well, have no idea, for example, what's actually gone on in Syria, what's actually gone on in Iraq. People forget about history altogether. I was amazed at a recent street interview carried out in a proper manner that found how many Americans on a New York street did not know who the United States had fought in the Civil War. Many people thought it was France or Russia or England in the American Civil War. How many people did not know who the Axis powers were, who the United States and the Allies had fought against during the Second World War? Few people named Germany, no one named Japan. Few people realized that the Second World War began in 1931, not 1939, when Japan invaded Manchuria, invaded China. So not knowing anything about, never mind ancient history, but things that happened only a few decades ago that involved the entire world and some of the greatest horrors in history, people are completely uninformed about them and unprepared to prevent them from happening again. But they'll find fake news about what's going on in the world today, and not knowing anything about history, have no way to measure and weigh the kind of news reports they're getting, or remember actually how the problem started in the Middle East to begin with. And therefore, no one can come up with proper solutions because they can't even identify the problem. And fake news gives us conspiracy theories and ideological perspectives that don't help at all. So what I'd like to caution, particularly among Orthodox Christians, is to be more circumspect and far more careful when you read or look at YouTube or the internet about the information you're picking up, about the ideas you're picking up, and try to do a little fact-checking instead of just taking things for granted because they happen to satisfy your own ideological orientation, and sometimes our own intellectual blindness and desire. The thing is, we as human beings should all be hoping to be constantly learning, constantly expanding our knowledge and understanding, certainly of the universe around us, but most of all of the humanity that we occupy the face of this earth with. And try to guide ourselves a little so that we can choose the ideas that we form from the things that we read and the things that we hear in a more honest and more moral fashion. And be aware that there is a great deal of false news, fake news, not just outside in the world, but within the church itself. And to be just a little more circumspect and pray a little bit more firmly about it, and try to fact-check ourselves as well as fact-checking the news that we read. And we can improve our communities and the world around us, as well as our own interhuman relationships, if we'll just do a little bit more of that. So thank you and God bless you. I'd also like to invite people to send me an email about subjects they'd like for us to deal with in our All Things Considered broadcasts. And we'll try to cover those subjects either by myself or with some of my colleagues gathered together for a little roundtable discussion of them. But email us and let us know what things you'd like to hear us discuss on All Things Considered. Thank you and God bless you.